8, 9, 10, 11 books read this month. Woo! Killing it up in here. It's amazing what you can get done when you don't leave the house. So yes, I did read 11 books in the month of August, all thanks to having moved to Spain and had to quarantine in this hotel room for 2 straight weeks. Let me tell you about them. So how I'm going to do this is I'm going to read them from my lowest rated book up to the highest. And I talked about several of these in past vlogs in more detail, so I'm going to keep it kind of short and sweet and just give you like brief impressions of each of the books. Okay, let's do it. Oh, also I have like almost no physical copies of these books because I moved, and so everything I own is being shipped or is back in Wisconsin. So Libby was a lifesaver this month. So I actually only have 3 physical books for this wrap up, but that's okay. We work with what we got. Starting with my 3-star reads, I have When They Call You a Terrorist by Patrice Concolors, who is the founder of the Black Lives Matter movement. And that's her memoir. Memoirs are difficult to rate, I feel like, because like it's a person's life, and so they're telling stories from their life, they're giving perspective and insight, and they're not necessarily telling a story, which as someone who is primarily a fiction reader, I tend to struggle with a little bit. And that was the difficulty I had with this particular work, was it felt almost like a collection of short stories more than one continuous work. Like I had difficulty finding a theme and continuation from one chapter to the next. Despite that, it was still a very strong read. It was still a very powerful insight into her life and what had led her to creating the Black Lives Matter movement, which was why I got it in the first place, was to learn that. So that was good. Next, I had a graphic novel, Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me by Mariko Tamaki. This one was 3 stars. It was very well done. The art was really nice. I really liked it. It had a nice subtle kind of pink theme throughout it, where you'd have the page of the graphic novel and there'd be the outline of everything, and just bits and pieces would have this pink shading throughout it, which I liked. Physical copy would be nice right here to illustrate. I did appreciate that. I think this particular work it didn't work for me personally. I think, sad to say, I'm just too old to appreciate your typical teenage drama. This book was about a girl who keeps breaking up with her girlfriend, and even though she's not in a very healthy relationship, it's clearly a very toxic relationship, she keeps getting back together with her. And yeah, I just can't really relate to that because it's been too long since my dramatic teenage years. But still a very, very cute story. Then going on to our 4-star reads for the month, I had A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. Loved the premise of this book. We have a high school girl who, for her big school project, she is going to investigate this murder that happened in her own town several years ago, this big event that she remembers happening when she was a child. And the results of the murder and the initial investigation by the police was that the boyfriend did it. The boyfriend then committed suicide, and so they were never able to complete their investigation. They never arrested the boyfriend. They basically just said the suicide is a sign of his guilt, so he did it, and closed the investigation. But then she never really believed that the boyfriend did it, and so several years later, she's now a high school senior, and she's doing her own investigation. I loved the research angle of this book. She was very, very thorough as far as like I'm going to be interviewing these people, and this is why I'm interviewing them, and this is why I'm asking these certain questions, and this is why I'm not asking these other ones. And I love that. I loved the really thorough research that was put into this. Unfortunately, the ending for me did not work. The ending I felt was quite unbelievable. It was one of those ones where, of course, with a thriller mystery, you want an ending to be a twist. You want something that you didn't see coming. Definitely did not see this ending coming, but to the extent where I didn't see it coming because it didn't quite make sense. Like, it didn't line up with the rest of what we had seen in the book. So I was disappointed by that. That's why it got 4 stars. I am still planning on reading the sequel to this just because I love the research. That was so great. All right, next we have The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill. This is a middle grade fantasy. It's about a village where they have this legend of a witch that lives in the woods, and every year they have to sacrifice a baby to the witch. Otherwise, she's going to come in and destroy the village. So every year they give this baby into the forest. They abandon the baby in the forest for the witch. On the flip side, there's a witch that lives in the forest. Every year she finds this abandoned baby in the same spot, and she doesn't understand why. I love that. That's just it's such a classic fairy tale intro of having to sacrifice a baby. On the flip side, the recipient of the sacrifice is so confused. They're just like, what is this? Why is there always a baby in this one spot every year, the same time every year? I love that. Witch goes to this sacrificial spot every year, finds the baby, picks up the baby, and puts it out for adoption in other villages. But then one year, the baby accidentally drinks some moonlight, and this causes the baby to get magical powers. And so the witch then decides to raise this baby girl as her own. And so the story is about this girl as she grows up and how she discovers her powers and learns more about her home village and the people behind the story of having to sacrifice the babies to the witch. Beautiful, beautiful lyrical writing in this story. It is just gorgeously written. It is a gorgeous book. My only critique with it that I had was it had many, many characters, and for me, a lot of the characters didn't get as fully developed as I would have liked. But yeah, other than that, it was just a gorgeous, gorgeous book. Next, I have an actual physical book. Yay! So we have A Burning by Megha Majumdar. This book takes place in India. It is about a train that is set on fire by some supposed terrorists, and a girl in a neighboring village posts some kind of controversial things on Facebook, kind of questioning the government and questioning why they didn't take more action into this. And she ends up getting arrested as the prime suspect for this terrorist attack. And so the book's about her trial and a bunch of other people in the community who are in some way involved with the trial and the witness statements and whatnot. The big thing for me for this book was I have actually been to India. I went to India on my deployment in 2018. And when we pulled into port for our Liberty visit, we pulled into a pretty poor area. It was a lot of, it was a very difficult trip for me because it was such a poor area, and it was very disheartening. I don't even know how to really talk about it because it was it felt like a very dark few days. Like, on the one hand, it was good to be exposed to this side of life, but on the other hand, it was just kind of depressing. And in a lot of ways, that's how this book was for me. Like, it was very well written. It was a very insightful, thought-provoking book. And it was also just really sad and depressed and left me with just kind of this empty feeling that was sad. So, yeah, there was that book. But still, it was very good. It was still a very well-written book. I think important. I think it was an important read. I think it's something, it says important things that people need to think about. Where was I? All right, so next we have I'll Be Gone in the Dark, One Woman's Obsessive Search for the Golden State Killer by Michelle McNamara. This book is a semi-memoir, it's not really a memoir at all. It's like it feels like a memoir because before this book could be published, Michelle McNamara passed away unexpectedly. And so she didn't get to see her work published, and there were several editor's notes of this work was actually compiled by these other people or was compiled from these articles that Michelle had written previously and whatnot. But it's actually a collection of research that Michelle had done into the Golden State Killer and trying to track him down, and how amateur sleuths have kind of gotten involved into these cold case investigations with the help of the internet and all of the modern advances that have helped with investigating these old cold cases. This book was so interesting. It really was. I really didn't know anything about the Golden State Killer prior to reading this book, other than recognizing the name as a title for a serial killer. It definitely read like a thriller in the sense that it was very, very gripping. Like, I had to read this book. I had to finish it. Especially because, like I said, I didn't know anything about it, so I didn't know who it was. So yeah, I felt like I had to finish it, but then also like a thriller, once it's finished, it's kind of like, well, okay, great. And really don't feel that desire to reread it. Next, what do we got next? Not So Pure and Simple. So when I was writing all these books down and kind of collecting my thoughts on what I had to say about them, I really don't know why this book has such a high rating. In a lot of ways, it's exactly the same as Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me. And a lot of the reasons I like this one are the reasons I didn't like that one so much. So I don't know. I'm just quirky that way. So basically, premise of this book is we have a young high school boy who is basically just going through life and making not great choices, and he's just learning and growing from them. I think part of the reason why I might have liked this one more is because it felt a little bit fresher, because it had a male POV. I am realizing that I don't typically read YA contemporaries from a male POV. They're typically almost always female POVs. So maybe that's why. I don't know. But I really enjoyed it. It felt newer. Like it was presenting something new. It was presenting something from a different angle. And maybe that was just because it was from a male POV. I don't know. And now we are finally up to our 5-star reads. We had 4 absolutely amazing 5-star reads this month. I was so happy with them all. So we have The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. Wow. What the heck was this book? Oh my gosh. Okay. So premise is we're in New York City, and each of the boroughs, so like Manhattan, Brooklyn, all 5 of the boroughs have their own city guardian. And there's like a physical manifestation, an avatar, if you will, of those boroughs, which is such a creative premise. I love that just on its own. Then we have the villain who's trying to like destroy New York City. And I've heard her in other reviews compared to as basically just Karen. She's basically just very white-centric, gentrified Karen. And I love that analogy. It's so perfect. And I think it makes the villain just so much better. This was such a great book. Loved it. Then we had another graphic novel, They Called Us Enemy, which is the, I guess not graphic novel, it's a graphic memoir of George Takei and when he went in a Japanese internment camp in the 1940s when he was just a very, very little boy. This book really honed in on one of my favorite sayings of all time, which is that you need to know your history, otherwise you are doomed to repeat it. I love that saying. I feel like it's one of the truest statements ever said. And this book was that. It talked a lot about this really bad thing that happened in the 40s. And if we're not careful, we are going to end up right back there with all the issues that we're having with immigration and everything today. And it was just such an impactful, important story. Really, really good. This has been a long-ass wrap-up, and I'm sorry. We have 2 left. I'm going to keep it really short because, like I said, these are ones that I talked about much more in depth in my last vlog. They are Rusha and the End of Time by Roshni Chokshi. This is the first in a middle grade fantasy series about Rusha, who is an Indian girl who accidentally sets in motion the end of the world and has to fix it. This book has some amazing, beautiful Indian mythology, has a sassy pigeon as their animal sidekick, and I feel like that's all you need to know. Go read it. And then last but not least, my favorite book of the month, The Heart's Invisible Furies. Whew, this book was a trip. It is just the most gorgeous writing, so funny, has some of the best one-liners I've ever seen. This book was just great. We're following Cyril through his life from the 1945 to 2015, so a full lifespan, everything that happens in this crazy roller coaster life had some very strong, like, circle of life themes, I guess you could call it, and it was just a beautiful, great book. Loved it so much. I don't have words. And that was August. It was a really, really good reading month. I'm very, very pleased.